Why is it critical for overall health? And how does one really know if they have gut issues?
It's crazy because there's so many functions of the gut. It has so many roles. And so it's hard to say, hey, this is a gut issue, because there's some things that you're going to think right off. If you have gas or bloating, if there's any issues in your motility, such as constipation, if you're having loose stool, even if your stool changes.
20 to 25 different fruits and vegetables being more important of a recommendation than total amount of fruits and vegetables. Obviously that's important too.
You have these thousands and thousands of strains of bacteria. When you have good variety, what they do is they maintain the overall organization in the population.
Is their gut microbiome slowly dying off?
What you eat, your bacteria eat.
Is there some sort of integration with our nervous tissue and the bacteria, or no? Can we talk about that?
When you eat food, the way that you assimilate it is.
Welcome, and it's good to have you back, Dr. Dan. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here. I love that, we got this reoccurring podcast going on. This is I look forward to these every day.
I'm doing great, man, and I hope you start to see some trickling effect of it, because now people are going to know when I say, hey, let's send you to the wizard. They know they have a face, right, to the name. So let's just dive right in. So gut health and weight loss. Cool. I decided that we'll do a series just because this is such a complex and deep topic that there's just no way we're going to do it in one episode. So today is all going to be more about like the intro, the science of gut health, and how it impacts overall weight loss, my man. All right. Perfect. Let's dive right in. So looking at the gut microbiome, right? So why is it critical for overall health? And how does one really know if they have gut issues? Sort of a secondary question.
Yeah, it's crazy because there's so many functions of the gut that it has so many roles. And so it's hard to say, hey, this is a gut issue, because there's some things that you're going to think right off that, if you have gas or bloating, if there's any issues in your motility, such as constipation, if you're having loose stool, even if your stool changes, maybe they're too skinny. Of course, things like blood in your stool, mucus in your stool, those are always good indications. If you get really bad acid reflux, indigestion, those are like the common things that people immediately go, something's wrong with my gut, and that's what most people are going to associate with. The problem is there's so many things that can be disrupted with the gut, and the gut has so many roles. People may not realize that their problem is actually coming from the gut. I mean, when we're talking about there's influences the gut has a huge role on the development and the maturation of your immune cells. You have a massive production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Like 93% of your serotonin is made in the gut.
Wow.
93%. And so, yeah, I mean, and you have to think, because your gut, we always say the gut's the second brain. Right. So there's all this nervous tissue that's in the gut. I mean, it is truly like a second brain. And you have this massive, pathway of the vagus nerve sending communication back and forth with the brain. So, stabilization and homeostasis with the nervous system is so important here. It affects your bone density. It affects your energy production, your mitochondria. So actually has a huge effect on your metabolism. But then the gut bacteria itself, they'll produce these neurotransmitters. You have regulation of your sex hormones coming from your gut. And also you actually synthesize a lot of your vitamins from the gut microbiome and the bacteria in there. So it does all that. It has a role in metabolism. We're going to talk about those. Being able to assimilate your food. It's an intelligent filter. I would say generically, think about your gut as an intelligent filter. It's involved in absorbing nutrients and get rid of waste at the same time. And while it's doing that, it's regulating all these hormones and sending all this nervous system activity and having an impact on your immune system. So if you just think about that,
no, it is
much,
and it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I want to help our listeners kind of make sense of it. without and save the more advanced ones for definitely an advanced one. So because I can imagine, and I know how deep you like to go. Well, and I like to learn. So, let's bring it back to the second brain, because my follow-up question here really has to do with this concept of calling it a second brain. So, some of the things you mentioned make a lot of sense, like the production of stuff. That's you have the bacteria, they produce stuff.
Right.
The stuff could be vitamins, could be minerals, various phytonutrients. That makes a lot of sense. When you start getting into the nervous system integration, that's where you lose me, right? Because the vagus nerve, one of the biggest cranial nerves that we have, responsible for, if I'm not mistaken, overall parasympathetic tone, right? Like the rest and digest.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have a lot of nervous
Yeah.
tissue in the digestive system ourselves, but when we're talking about bacteria, is there some sort of integration with our nervous tissue and the bacteria, or no? You're just talking like can we talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean there is an effect on multiple levels. One, the bacteria themselves are going to produce waste product, right? And they're producing a lot of gases, and these oxygens, these hydrogens, these sulfides, they affect our mitochondria, our energy production. And the one area, when you have a mitochondrial issue, the one area that is going to be impacted the most is the brain and the nervous system, because it requires so much energy.
Okay.
So that's one mechanism. The second thing, when you have dysbiosis, you have an imbalance in these gut bacteria, you have like an inflammatory gut process. It disrupts your production of neurotransmitters.
Makes
so
sense.
that immediately impacts the brain. It also, you have not on the other side of this, you don't just have neurotransmitters, you have neuropeptides that heal the brain and help neuroplasticity and learning. And those are produced in the gut. So you get a disruption there. And what we know is, people hear the term leaky gut. So what does that mean? Because this is really important to this particular part of the conversation. The gut has to, what's supposed to happen when you eat food, the way that you assimilate it is the cells in your gut, they absorb those nutrients and pass them into the bloodstream. But if things cause those cells to separate, kind of like the mortar between bricks, if the mortar was gone out as bricks, things can get between the bricks instead of being absorbed. If the cells were the brick being absorbed by the brick itself, things get between. That's called hyperpermeability, and we got two types of it. One is between the bricks. One is the brick gets destroyed.
And both of these, hyperpermeability is still leaky gut. Okay.
Yes, that's the clinical term for leaky gut, is this permeability. But what we find is the glue or the mortar that holds those cells together are called tight junction proteins. And your two biggest ones are called occludin and zonulin. And if you look those up, you'll find those same proteins are at the blood-brain barrier. They're at the pulmonary barrier in your lungs, and even like other barriers in the body. When the tight junction proteins start to break down in the gut, that same process starts to affect in the brain. So a lot of times we'll say fire in the gut, fire in the brain. So neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, the byproducts of the gut bacteria, the tight junction proteins, every one of those interfere with the nervous system. And then if you look at the gut, the wall of the gut, there's an intricate network of nerves wrapped all around it, right? And those nerves are constantly responding to what's happening. And so there's anywhere from 100 to 600 million neurons in your intestinal tract. And so they're constantly relaying information to the brain. So if there's an inflammatory process, if there's too much gas, you'll feel it. You also, like I said, you get a lot of serotonin there. But that's what's feeding you. So when people say they get that gut feeling, it's like affecting their nervous system. And that's why when people get really stressed, some people eat due to stress, some people lose their appetite. And it's because all this nervous system. So it's such an intricate web. You almost can't separate the multitude of influences that the gut actually directly has on the nervous system.
Nothing directly nervous tissue wise connecting them, but it might as well be with everything that you're talking about. I mean, that makes so much sense from the neurotransmitters to everything else. So yeah, that's pretty insane, right? Like the relationship. Um,
Yeah.
so keeping it still on the light side with leaky gut. I know this is as much as we can, right? Might be a bit of an oxymoron to say that, but uh, yeah,
I'm
let's try
trying
to
to
float on
float
the
at the
surface of leaky
surface.
gut and save the complexity. Um, is it like autoimmune disease, like we talked about before, where it's a switch sort of situation where once the switch is turned on, now that hyperpermeability is kind of there, and it's a much harder to get out of once that process stops, or it's not so much to the same extent of autoimmunity?
No, it's not. It's not to the extent now. Because on a basic level, your stress levels, how much caffeine you consume, certain foods, they can naturally cause the gut to open up, right? Even if if you get like food poisoning, one of the ways that your gut causes diarrhea is you get this massive permeability and it floods your gut with water from your blood. So, yeah, I mean that can go back and forth. Now, when we're talking about permeability because the cells separate, that's easy to influence. But when the cells are damaged, that's where you start to get in like, okay, that got hit pretty hard. And the longer that's allowed to continue, the worse it gets. And if you do, God forbid, you get any autoimmunity to the gut, and that's like when we're in a serious set where it's like, okay, that bell's been rung. We got to do
So
what
you
we
can
can to manage
have
it.
plenty of leaky gut situations where it's not triggering it's not considered an autoimmune disease yet.
Yeah. And so, and that's the crazy thing. So just to keep it like a little simple, when you eat your food, if you fully break down the food and because what your body typically has an immune response to
Right.
is the protein. And broken down proteins and amino acid. If you can fully get those amino acids broken down, that eliminates a huge majority of the response you're going to get to foods. So you don't have that immune response. So you can even have leaky gut, but if your ability to digest foods, break it down thoroughly, is really good, you minimize your immune response incredibly. So you may not even get any inflammatory response, even if you have leaky gut. So you have to have multiple things going on that's going to create that problem. And that's how, some people have had permanent gut damage. You can still get them into a non-inflammatory state by improving their ability to, one, regulate some of their immune response, but number two, and most
And so
importantly,
this
is
is this is
fully
why
break
I've
down your
never seen a
food.
functional protocol that doesn't have broad spectrum digestive enzymes, right? Like that's one of the first things you do, and now it makes
Yeah.
so much more sense. Because yeah, like the more we break it down, the less reaction that could take place. So continuing on our journey, really looking at the science of it. Where do bacteria lend aid in the digestive process? Like now we're looking at digestion because the human body has its own intensive process of digesting food, right? Like from the very salivary enzymes when we
Yeah.
first start consuming food through the first bite to the mechanical churning of the acidic environment in the stomach, and more so we got powerful enzymes in the small intestine, right, in the duodenum. So we already have this amazing digestive process. So where do the bacteria come into to digestion?
So it's like the third phase. So the stomach, with the stomach acid and your bile and your pancreatic enzymes, those are going to break down your proteins. It's mainly your stomach acid going to break down that protein, if it's good. But most people have weak stomach acid. And just make a note on that. People should not be consuming a lot of water or fluids, and definitely not the pH balanced water when they're eating, because they just dilute their stomach acid. That does not improve the pH level in your blood at all, just weakens your stomach acid. So then you have bile that's breaking down your fats, and your pancreatic enzymes are breaking down a little bit of everything, but a high amounts of your carbohydrates. So that's the first step. Then your small intestine, think of it as mainly as a sponge. It's just absorbing as many small particles as it can. But there's a third process going on. When we get into the colon, now the bacteria is actually going to extract a lot of energy from the food. And we can actually measure how well that's done. There's certain ratios of gut bacteria that are going to extract really efficiently as much energy from your food as possible. And you can actually look in the person's stool and measure the energy of their stool, how well their bacteria is actually extracting it from their food. So that's one big thing, is actually extracting the energy. And what's crazy is they've actually found, they used to think the Firmicutes of bacteria to eat ratio was critical, but now we find that it's very specific strains of bacteria that they extract way more energy from your food than you think you are. And so you end up in a hypercaloric state just because you have incredibly efficient bacteria just pulling out as much energy as possible. And then on the other side, and that's those people that they can eat anything they want, they never gain any weight, is they have bacteria that poorly extracts energy from their food. So it's crazy. So that's one big.
You never hear about people taking certain probiotic strains to support their weight loss, right? I mean, maybe Akkermansia because of the gut health, but as far as energy balance, I've never heard of people doing that, manipulating their energy balance with strains. You've seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some good research on it. We do know that there is a couple bacteria in the Bacteroidetes phylum that are really good at it. And when they have a gut that's super dominant in those species, they tend to struggle with weight gain. That's one thing of actually breaking down the food and absorbing energy. We'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about the specific of weight loss. But the other piece is some of them are metabolizing some of the leftover products. They ferment the fiber, we extract from that. They actually grow. One of the big things is the fermentation of the fiber and the breakdown of our fiber, the postbiotics. And that's, some of those of our short chain fatty acids. Vitamin K is huge with, absorption from the gut and production by gut bacteria. So they actually extract certain nutrients and calories from our food. On top of what else so they're like your the guy that comes as your pinch hitter at the very end. They're going there. They're going to mop up the rest of the stuff and try to maximize everything else. When you think eating nose to tail, think that's what your body does. Nose to tail is how you digest.
And it's just this symbiotic relationship where everything they don't need is what we need, and what we don't need is what they need. That's a pure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, man, getting into the history of this symbiotic relationship. I mean, I know that we didn't even discuss that as a topic, but I mean, just kind of poking your brain here. I mean, how have humans and animals always had this symbiotic relationship with bacteria as far as long as we know?
Yeah. I mean, from what we can understand, we formed and we're able to grow because of our microbiome and our relationship with the fungi, the bacteria, and the viral components in our body. They've actually looked at our DNA and found that we've used viral DNA in our human selves. So it's like all of these things have created some type of symbiosis to allow us to develop, because we got bacteria everywhere, our skin, our mouth. We got it all over, It sounds nasty. We can track gut bacteria 3 generations on both sides of the family, because, when people are doing the deed, they're swapping bacteria. And we see that with a lot with family. We'll see a couple that are both having gut issues, and we'll look at their guts and they're almost mirrors of each other. So it's like, maybe on your dating app, you should do a gut test, right? That's what I'm starting to think that, it's like, hey, especially as I'm getting older, like, if you're dating, let me tell you all the blood labs and laboratory workups
just put your gut results, your poop results right there on your profile, and you're going to choose your partners based off of bacteria. Hey, man, I've seen some crazier things. Yeah. Speaking of gut bacteria and diversity here, did you catch that documentary, Hack Your Health, on Netflix? Just came out. I think it came out like a year or two ago.
I've seen it in my lineup, but I
It's a
have
good,
not watched it.
it's a good introduction and basic introduction for people looking to just kind of get their initial understanding. And really, the main takeaway was diversity. And so that's why I bring that up is let's talk diversity, right? Like the term and the phrase a diverse microbiome. They essentially, talk about that being the most important thing is diversity. And so this is where they come up with a recommendation of 20 to 25 different fruits and vegetables being more important of a
Yeah.
recommendation than total amount of fruits and vegetables. Obviously that's important too, but it almost seems like
Right.
diversity is more important. So let's talk about that. What does that mean, diversity, and what does it mean for us?
Yeah. So the gut bacteria have so many species, and so people get in the habit of saying good or bad bacteria. Now, there's definitely pathogenic or opportunistic in parasites, but outside of that, the overall picture of the gut's pretty relative to the whole picture. And so you have these thousands and thousands of strains of bacteria. And when you have good variety, what they do is they maintain the overall organization in the population. You never want one rising to the top, because when it does, so think of it like all these bacterial populations, they produce certain things. And we hear all the time in our life that it's all about balance. So what these things are producing, you need a relative balance of. And so if you have some bacteria that are too high, that also means you're going to have others that are low. So these things that these bacterial populations make, these short chain fatty acids, our vitamins, our minerals, our neurotransmitters. So like, think about it like this. Let's just look at it from a neurotransmitter standpoint. We know certain bacteria are more likely to produce GABA. We know some are more likely to produce dopamine or serotonin. Well, if you have a relative excess balance of bacteria that make dopamine, you get too much dopamine. And if you look up the indications of dopamine, in an excess level, you get nervous system issues, you get anxiety, you get hyper focus, right? You get a problems. Serotonin is also. So just from the neurotransmitter standpoint, not having a bacterial species across the board that's balanced, then you have a problem. So one, you need diversity so that what they're producing is staying balanced. Also, when you have a good diverse group, and there's thousands of strains, when you have good diversity, they also keep each other at bay. They help regulate the immune system, and it makes you resilient to invasive species. That's the number one thing. So you remember a few years ago when there was an outbreak of salmonella at like a Chipotle? Not everybody that got it got sick. Some of them, their stomach acid broke it down. But also, if you have good diversity in your microbiome, you're way less likely to get sick from an invasive species, because they're in there and they're like, nope, you can't. We're not going to let you overgrow or not let you, infect the population, like the herd, right? So it's like herd immunity. It's like the more bacteria you have, the more that each one of them's producing their own things and they're keeping everything balanced. So diversity, without a doubt, is critical. And when we see people that have low diversity, they have higher issues with health problems and less tolerance to
Would you
regular
say
stressors
that
in life.
the volume or the amount of bacteria um, is going to be by default relatively consistent, with the exception of antibiotics and stuff like that? And it's just we're talking about diversity, but the total number of bacteria, maybe based off the size of the stomach or size of the system, that's going to be relatively consistent because it has to be, or even that can fluctuate.
Well, that's man, that fluctuates. We look at so many gut analyses, and even the volume. You'll find some people. We had somebody the other day. They were totally devoid of a whole phylum of bacteria, and they've had weird issues and they don't know what had happened. So there's so many things, like you said, an invasive species can kill that out. A diet that isn't. So this is the key thing. A diet in diverse polyphenols and flavonoids. And the way you do that is huge variety of fruits and vegetables, because the different types of fiber, the color of the fiber, because the polyphenols are going to come from the colors. So the different colors and the different types of fiber feed different types of bacteria. And so it's diversity of your fiber grows diversity of your gut microbiome. And that's the best way to do it. And that's why people that, it sucks when you see somebody who has gotten really restricted and they're only eating a few things. It's damaging the diversity. Now, it may not hurt their health because people have, there's so many different influencing factors, but the diversity of those fibers have an impact. The amount of those things that they eat have an impact. So people have really strict diets are really hurting their microbiome and potentially can have some long-term health impacts that they may not see for 20, 30 years.
It makes a ton of sense. And that is going to have me kind of jump to another topic. We just talked about how important diversity is, which requires a diverse consumption of fruits and vegetables, colorful. Obviously, you can supplement with probiotics. You can even supplement with prebiotics, but you're never going to beat whole natural food sources, right? So how the hell are people feeling better with carnivore diet? Okay, so this is so fascinating to me. My guess, and I'm curious what you think is, because I know you've thought about this, a carnivore diet is essentially the strictest restrictive diet you can go on, right? And so if you're an individual who's reacting to so many things, taking that list of 10, 15 foods that you can eat on an autoimmune diet, which does well because those are the least reactive, might be more difficult for someone to adhere to than when you say just eat meat, right? Like that might be easier to adhere to. So is it your opinion that the decrease in food reactions and triggering food sensitivities is the reason why people can feel so much better on carnivore diet despite getting the fiber that they need? So it's almost like that's better for them than the lack of fiber, which over time means they're going to run into that problem? Or is there something different about not needing the fiber when you're not consuming anything else? Like, totally lost on this, trying to make sense of it.
I wanted to interrupt for a quick minute. I have a free peptide guide. So everything you're learning today, we put it down, the protocols and exactly what you need to know. You can access that by clicking the link at the beginning of my description of the video. Now back to the show.
No, I think it's deeper waters than people think. It really is. A couple pieces. If we think about, let's first talk about it in just a generic concept of too much or too little of something. The immune system. So a lot of these people are doing it because they're having this immune reactivity. One of the key critical points to having a healthy immune system is plenty of protein. Most people don't consume enough protein. When they go to a carnivore diet, they're getting lots of amino acids, right? They're getting a lot of protein. So they're actually giving their body the amino acids and the proteins necessarily for healthy globulins and albumin, total protein, making neurotransmitters, making these hormones and neuropeptides. Also giving their body enough resources of protein to maintain lean muscle mass, to rebuild tissue. So that's one big piece. It's like, okay, now all of a sudden I went from the standard American diet where I don't get enough protein, where I'm getting enough protein. Two is carnivore diet is going to provide quite a bit of your fat soluble vitamins, especially if you're getting grass fed, really healthy, right? So you're getting all these fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, which most people are deficient in those. The next piece is going to be your omega fatty acids. So you're getting some fatty acids, and from like meat, especially if the fat is really yellow, you're going to get butyric acid, which is a short chain fatty acid produced by bacteria fermenting fiber. So you can actually get some of the short chain fatty acids a completely different way. And that is the number one short chain fatty acid that regulates an autoimmune response or helps control these cells called T regulatory cells. So there's a lot of components that could be really giving people something that they've been really lacking. Now, on the other side of too much excess, when someone's had a lot of issues and they've reached a point, the nervous system in the gut is fried, their immune modulation in their gut is fried, and sometimes the immune system needs to have a repetitive molecule that it can build some tolerance to. And when you cut out all these fibers and your gut's super sensitive, that's when the things like lectins and leptins and oxalates and phytic acid, when you can cut those out a little bit, And there's even some other pieces that you'll find in there that can create some issue. And then you also might have people that have lactose and fructose intolerance. So when you can cut out all of these sugars and these protective plant compounds that I don't think are problematic for most people because we evolved eating them, right? Most of us can. If somebody does really well on a carnivore diet, you need to be asking the question why. But it is a short-term intervention. But I think in the long term, we don't have any blue zones that we've identified. These are those zones where people are like super centenarians. We don't have any. Yeah, we don't have any super centenarian populations that were carnivore. So I'm not for or against it. To me, my answer is usually depends. It's like, is this good for me? Is it good for my friend? But it's a good intervention that sometimes I've seen some really amazing outcomes for people. I've only had a few people that got on it long term and they maintained feeling good. Now I think even Dr. Saladino, the carnivore guy, he's not. He's even
doing a lot
steered
of
away
carbs. He's
from
doing
it,
a lot of carbs now.
But
It's natural carbohydrates, a lot of honey, and a lot of fruit. Hundreds of grams a day, actually, which is a lot. But he's also a very active guy. So yeah, he's doing a ton of carbohydrates, but he's also very, very active. Yeah, I mean, is essentially what you're saying is it's other benefits that a carnivore diet might be on the short term enhancing, which gives it the benefits. Do you think these people that are benefiting, and we see it symptomatically? I mean, you probably have seen. So yeah, I mean, he's a very active individual, and so his carbohydrate intake is now in the hundreds, but he's keeping it really focused on honey and fruit. So it's very, very interesting. Do you think, and I know we just don't have enough data, right? There's, like you said, how many people are actually adhering to carnivore longer than a couple months? Not many. The ones that are, I mean,
yeah.
is their gut microbiome slowly dying off?
Yeah, it's switching, because what you eat, your bacteria eat. And so there are some, very particular populations of bacteria that over time, because of a heavy fat, heavy protein diet, does actually alter the microbiome. So you'll start to see a drop in, I think it was the Clostridium bacteria, and there's some really good ones that are super important there. But you'll see certain populations. There's been some really good studies that you see, like Ruminococcus, that'll go higher. So there's very, very specific species that alter because they don't do well with a drop in certain things. So you'll see an overall drop in the short chain fatty acids, and you also start to make as this byproduct called trimethylamine oxide. That's a fermentation of choline. You'll start to is choline and one more amino acid, but those will cause TMA to go up, and it does. It's people can metabolize it well, but it is that molecule has an impact on cardiovascular health. So you see some shifts because, like I said, the bacteria need certain things, and some of them are going to do well in a high fat, high protein animal meat diet. Others are going to do better in a high fiber diet. But you do lose overall diversity. You have a more balanced microbiome in overall picture of bacterial species on a plant rich diet. I don't want to say a
Yeah, and I
plant-based diet,
think
but a
like
plant-rich
you
diet.
said, there's no blue zones where there is only meat consumption. So I think that says it all for sure. Okay, so let's
Totally.
shift the rest of the episode to weight loss, right? So let's talk gut microbiome. How is it impacting our weight?
Yeah, so man, multiple things. I mean, this is where we learned a lot about like the GLP, the GIP, and the glucagon agonist because the gut bacteria are producing a lot of these things. So one is the bacteria's ability to extract the energy, right? So if you have certain populations that are overgrown, and that's where they've done the studies on the heavy rat, the skinny rat, they did the fecal matter transplants, and the rat that had the
Yeah,
diabetes
that's
completely
wild.
wiped it
That
out
is
and
so
lost weight,
wild.
became Yeah. So crazy. And that's been actually a really good process to see people go through. The other thing is are some of these very particular things that gut bacteria make. The short chain fatty acids, one, will improve your metabolism. You get an increase in metabolism. You'll also see an increase in this. There's a peptide YY, we call it PYY, and it has an impact on your hormones that affect satiety. And so you get ghrelin impacts, leptin impacts. So the relative ratio of that gut bacteria improve. The more short chain fatty acid production you get, you're going to see more satiety, less like really strong cravings, and that's what they say a lot is certain bacteria make you crave certain things, but it's because they're disrupting. They can actually create insulin resistance. There's two specific bacteria we see in PCOS, and they do exactly the opposite of GLP-1. So you can influence these insulin receptors, satiety, motility. You have all these factors that will directly change your metabolism. And like I said, some of the byproducts these bacteria make can directly damage your mitochondria. So you actually slow down your metabolism. And someone like that, if the gut's impacting them and they start trying to lose weight, those are the people that kind of have to go an extra extreme caloric deficit than they think they should have to. Like, and you see those people, you're like, man, we got to push this a little bit further. A lot of times those people, their gut bacteria is bad, or it has, now I wouldn't say bad. I'd say their diversity is off or their composition is dysfunctional.
So just like the complexity of overall health, just the category of weight loss, there's so many different pathways and there's so many things to consider. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know for us, the approach that we take with patients is a lot of long fasting, but we give them a lot of fiber too as well, because we know that with the fasting there's going to be a die off, right? There's going to be a die off of the good and the bad, so we want to replenish with fiber. And now I've actually shifted more from being okay with the psyllium husk fiber supplement to a more broad spectrum fiber supplement, trying to get as much variety as we possibly can. So it's unanimously powerful for somebody to be able to have that variety. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
No, that's such a key piece is, when people do eat, make sure they're not eating the same thing all the time. Get a lot of variety, and these multi fiber derivatives like psyllium husk, inulin, chicory root, any of those things are they're really going to help. Even some colostrum is really good to, and then you can do your fermentable or your fermented foods. As long as they're clean, that's the idea. The gut, while it's complex, the solution doesn't have to be, get good diversity of your food, eat whole foods, eat them in their natural form. Low in preservatives, don't fry a bunch of stuff. And you're just by doing that, you're going to improve your lifespan and your health span just by a balanced diet.
And the balanced diet being the diet that has the diversity, has enough fruits and vegetables and enough adequate protein.
Yeah. And one of the things I tell people is preservatives preserve fat. Make sure you're not eating a bunch of processed foods with a bunch of preservatives. It's we know that it's going to be disruptive, but it's really, at the end of the day, even excess caloric intake is going to alter your microbiome. It's not just making you absorb too many calories. You're also feeding all this bacteria that loves a lot of calories. And so you're going to get overgrowth. So, it comes down to balance. Every time it comes down to balance.
Yeah. I mean, excess of anything, right, can be toxic for sure. Yeah. Any crazy advancements in literature that you've seen lately regarding the gut, maybe, specific to weight loss or just kind of overall?
The more, I think this Akkermansia species that they've been doing, there's a couple more that are breaking down biofilms. What we do know, like I said, we can identify the neurotransmitters that are off. We've seen this. This has been the craziest thing with some of our children that we're working with. They come in with like an ADD, ADHD type diagnosis, poor focus, oppositional defiance disorders. And you look at their gut and their gut is clearly disrupted. And so the neurotransmitters are off. So first we clean up the gut, and then we can identify the neurotransmitters that are lacking, identify the bacteria, the probiotics that make those specific neurotransmitters, give it to the kid, let it repopulate their gut, and now their gut is a factory again for making the things they needed all along. What you see is this subtle improvement in overall behavior. And I think the behavioral sciences and longevity are really key. And now I think they're really starting to target the gut because it appears that a large majority of Parkinson's actually starts in the gut. So, and then like as these new peptides, there's so many more peptides that they're identifying that are coming from the gut. I think that science is fascinating, but really I just love the overall picture and how the brain, like stuff for the heart, the immune system, pretty much every organ system, and how we function overall has a massive impact by what's actually going on in the gut. So I think, just rounding it out and understanding the importance of it is the biggest, but the gut is honestly, we talk about it in simple terms, but it's super understanding it.
Oh yeah.
Is super complex.
Oh yeah. I mean,
right? It's
I mean, the more and more you dig into it, the more you want to understand it. Right. And then you realize there's so much more. Are there companies that custom develop a formula of probiotics based off of any objective testing, or we're not there yet?
That's a good question. I don't know of any yet. I think that's coming up. I think it's coming up. It'll still be pretty generic, but it'll still start to give some customization to it. But, I think Viome has some really good testing aimed at diet, lifestyle, nutrition factors that are specifically meant to alter the overall species of the gut and bring some better diversity.
Yeah. So right now we have to rely on the wisdom of someone like you, who knows what the hell they're doing, who's seen this over and over again to make recommendations of maybe certain strains, right? So Akkermansia, I've been seeing so much more about that. We talked about, generally speaking, probiotics, how good they are. So let's talk about Akkermansia. So Akkermansia is the one that they're saying is just specifically so good with leaky gut.
Leaky gut, and it's really good for the GLP-1 pathway. Matter of fact, it was one of the first ones they've seen some reversal in diabetes. Taking someone who didn't have a good population of that species, it's called a Microbiota is the phylum. But when people increase it, you start to see improvements in their blood sugar markers. So it's pretty awesome. It's more of an expensive probiotic. And the reason is not because a lot of people aren't producing. It's because most of the probiotics you see in the store, they're called facultative, which means they can survive in oxygen or non-oxygen, so aerobic or anaerobic environments. Well, Akkermansia cannot survive in the moment it's exposed to oxygen, it dies. It's anaerobic only. And so it has to be, developed, capsulated, and transported without being exposed to oxygen. It's a little bit more of an expensive process. So that's why you're paying a bigger amount for a bacteria or a bacterial strain like that, because a lot of these really healthy bacteria, all we know we can do right now is feed them fiber because nobody is producing.
So would you say Akkermansia for a population of 1,000 overweight people would probably be the best starter choice that would work for the most amount of people, or still hard to say that?
It's hard to say. I've seen a lot of people that I thought that I've had people come in. It's clearly not a standalone feature because I've had a lot of people come in that are diabetic or have metabolic syndrome and their A1C is high and they have all these high lipids. And when we get their gut panel back, that Akkermansia family is actually doing really well. So it's still also relative ratio to the rest
so
of
it is without the test, you're taking Akkermansia and it's a total guess. Could be a game changer, might not do anything.
Yeah.
And so this is where more of a broad spectrum product might be better just for the chances of the diversity thing.
Yeah, and I tell people it doesn't hurt to take it, but once you finish the bottle that you're taking, get a different strain. And that's improving the diversity, right? So just change up all the different strains and species you're taking.
How often
on a
do you
regular
personally
basis.
rotate probiotics?
soon as I'm out of a bottle, I'll switch
So
to
you
a
24/7, at least when you, most of the time, you're not cycling on and off to a different one. You stay on.
Yeah, I pretty much will take one probiotic or a prebiotic
Do you think that's the
daily.
point where most people probably should be doing this in the most ideal scenario, or do you have some particular issues yourself that kind of, you need a little bit more support?
I tend to eat very light. I don't eat a whole lot, and I'll get stuck in space where I'm not getting enough diversity. So I'm like, well, at least let me change up the species that I'm eating. I used to have a lot of just lingering gut issues. I don't have those anymore. But so I tried to be pretty good about what I'm taking and how much how much variety I have.
That's freaking awesome. Oh man, I every single time I'm stoked for this series. We got a few more episodes. Looking at my list here, we got next one. We're going to get into gut microbiome and the diet, like specifically really diving into that, and then we'll get into lifestyle factors. So, oh man, this, and I'm sure we're going to add questions as we go. I mean, the gut's fascinating for sure. So
Yeah,
awesome
awesome
till
stuff.
the next one, man. We'll see you guys soon.
If you guys found that informative, then you're not gonna wanna miss this next video. I'm gonna link to it right here, guys. Click that. It's gonna be a continued explanation of what you guys learned today. We'll see you later.